The waves whispered to him before he ever knew how to sail them. From the cliffs of his homeland, young Kaelen would stand for hours, watching the gray horizon shift and break beneath the weight of storm clouds, feeling a restless pull in his chest. Other boys of Norskog chased each other through pine forests and trained with wooden swords in the shadow of the long haul. But Kaelen's heart belonged to the sea. It was not enough for him to fish the fjords or ferry from village to village. He dreamed of ruling it, bending its will, becoming one with the endless water that stretched beyond all known lands. When he was still a child, a wandering seeress visited his father's hall. She came cloaked in sealskin, her hair braided with beads of bone and amber, her eyes clouded as though she saw nothing in the mortal world, only the threads that lay behind it. She looked at Kaelen as he clutched at his mother's hand, and she whispered, "This one belongs to Aegir, the sea itself. He will not live as other men live. He will either drown in its hunger or rise as something beyond mortal flesh." Kaelen never forgot her words. The village mocked him for his wild dreams, yet his mother told him quietly that such words carried weight. His father, grim and practical, said nothing. He was a raider of modest renown, content with his land and his boats. But Kaelen's hunger was deeper than any he had ever known, and as he grew into manhood, that hunger consumed him. His chance came when the Jarls of the coast called for raids against the southern kingdoms. The ships gathered in the fjord, 50 dragon-proud longships eager to taste blood and fire. Kaelen, only 17, begged his father to take him. At last, grudgingly, the old warrior agreed. "But hear me," his father growled. "If you fall into the sea, it will claim you, as the seeress foretold. Do not fight against what the gods have woven." The first raid was fire and thunder, blood and screaming. Kaelen hurled himself into battle with a fury that surprised even himself. His axe split helm and shield alike, his young arms shaking with exhaustion but refusing to stop. At night, he stood on the prow of the ship, staring at the moon's path on the waves, feeling a strange kinship, as though the sea itself had wrapped him in its embrace. The raids continued for years, and Kaelen's name began to spread. He was fearless in the surf, often leaping into the water to drag men back to the ships when storms threatened to swallow them. His voice was steady in battle, his eyes burning with something that unsettled his comrades. They called him Kaelen Havblod, Kaelen of the sea's blood. But greatness does not come without loss. On his 5th raid, when the fleet turned homeward heavy with silver and slaves, a storm broke upon them with a ferocity no man had seen in a generation. Lightning split the sky, waves as tall as mountains crushed the ships. Kaelen clung to the oar, his muscles screaming as he fought the pull of the tide. But one by one the ships vanished into the deep. When dawn came, only 3 ships remained of 50. The sea was littered with wreckage, bloated corpses, and half-shattered shields. Among the dead was Kaelen's father, swallowed by the storm without a trace. Kaelen himself had survived only by tying himself to the mast with strips of torn sail, screaming at the gods until his voice broke. That night, as the survivors lit fires upon the shore of a nameless land, Kaelen walked alone into the surf. He waited until the water reached his chest, then fell to his knees. "Take me," he shouted into the waves. "If I am yours, then take me. If I am to rule you, then show me your strength. I have nothing left to fear." The water stilled around him, unnaturally calm. And from the depths, something stirred. A voice, not words, but a roar, a presence, rose inside his skull, vast and endless. He saw visions, a crown of salt and coral, a throne carved of whalebone, armies of drowned men rising to follow his call. But he also saw blood, endless blood, and the faces of those he would lose. He fell forward into the water, gasping, and for a moment he thought he had drowned. When he awoke, he was on the shore again, coughing seawater from his lungs. The tide had deposited him like a broken offering. But something had changed. The men who looked at him that morning said there was a gleam in his eyes, as if the sea itself gazed out through them. Kaelen said nothing, but deep within, he knew the path had begun. From that day, Kaelen pursued his destiny with merciless hunger. He gathered men to him, outcasts, shipwrecked warriors, dreamers as restless as himself. He promised them more than silver, more than fleeting victories. He promised them a kingdom that stretched from wave to wave, a dominion no landbound Jarl could claim. Some laughed, but others followed. Years passed. Kaelen's fleet grew from 3 to 10, from 10 to 20. He struck at coasts no Viking had ever dared, chasing storms, carving his legend with fire and salt. But each victory demanded its price. Comrades drowned, friends fell in battle, and Kaelen began to feel the weight of sacrifice pressing upon him. Yet he never faltered. For every death, he whispered their names into the waves, promising the sea would remember them. One winter, as the aurora burned across the sky, Kaelen returned to his homeland. He found his mother older, her hair silver, her eyes filled with sorrow. She looked at him and said, "Your father rests in Agir's hall now. Will you join him one day as a man? Or do you mean to join the gods themselves?" Kaelen did not answer. He could not, for the truth was already alive in his chest. He no longer sought mere kingship. He sought to become more than a man, more than a king. The sea whispered to him at night, telling him of power beyond death. He would not be content until the waves themselves obeyed his will. And so Kaelen set his course not for glory alone, but for godhood. Kaelen's return to the sea was swift, for land no longer felt like home to him. The soil beneath his feet seemed lifeless compared to the restless hunger of the waves, and the long haul's warmth could not soothe the fire in his chest. He gathered those who would follow, men scarred by raids, sailors broken by storms, and wanderers with nothing left to lose. To each of them he spoke the same words: "We will not be raiders, chasing scraps of silver. We will not be thralls to landbound jarls. We will be kings of the sea, and no man, god, or storm will stop us." At first, they followed out of desperation, mocking his visions in private. But Kaelen was unlike other leaders. He did not cower before storms. He steered his ships into the blackest waves, and when his men trembled, he sang to them in a voice raw with defiance, calling on Agir, Njord, and Ran to test his strength. More than once, when the fleet seemed certain to break apart, Kaelen stood at the prow with axe in hand, roaring at the thunder as if he might split the storm in half by his will alone. Victories piled upon victories. His men began to believe. They took silver from kingdoms unprepared for his fury, dragging back gold, cloth, and thralls. But Kaelen always demanded more than plunder. He told them, "This silver will rot. This gold will be stolen again. But the sea, that will endure. If we claim it, we will live forever." His words began to spread like wildfire. Raiders who once mocked him now begged to join his fleet. By the end of 5 years, Kaelen commanded 50 ships, their dragon prows rising like teeth against the horizon. Yet glory carried its shadow. One autumn, when the fleet raided the coast of Francia, Kaelen's closest shield brother, Varric, fell in battle. Varric had been at his side since the first storm, one of the 3 who had survived the sea's wrath with him. He had laughed at Kaelen's visions, but he had never left. Now Kaelen held his friend's bloodied body as the battle raged around him. For the first time since his father's death, Kaelen felt his resolve crack. He carried Varric's body to the sea, wading knee-deep into the surf. He carved runes into his own arm with a dagger, offering his blood as sacrifice. Ran, goddess of the drowned, take him. But know this, his soul belongs not to you, not to Hel, not even to Odin. His soul belongs to me, and when I claim the sea, he will rise again to stand at my side. The men whispered in awe. Some were afraid. Others looked at Kaelen as if he had already become more than human. But the gods were listening. That night, as Kaelen slept on the deck of his ship, he dreamed of a great hall beneath the sea, its walls made of coral and bone, lit by torches that burned with green fire. A vast figure sat upon a throne, his beard flowing like seaweed, his eyes endless as the ocean depths. It was Agir, the sea god, lord of storms and feast halls. His wife Ren stood beside him, her hair writhing like kelp, her net glimmering with the souls of the drowned. "Kaelen Havblod," Agir thundered, his voice like waves breaking upon rock. "You dare claim what is mine?" Kaelen knelt, though his pride burned. "I claim nothing that is not already calling to me. You know it as well as I. The sea speaks my name. I will not be a thrall to the gods. I will be as you are. Greater." Ran laughed, a sound like drowning. "Bold. But boldness feeds the sea. Very well. If you would be more than mortal, prove it. Seek the serpent of the deep. Slay it, and perhaps you will deserve the crown you dream of. Fail, and you will join the drowned forever. Kaelen awoke, drenched in seawater, though the sky was clear. Around his neck was a small shard of coral, glowing faintly. He knew it was no dream. The trial of the sea gods had begun. He told his men of the vision, and many shuddered. The serpent of the deep was a tale told to frighten children. A creature older than Midgard itself, said to coil beneath the oceans, large enough to strangle whole fleets in its grip. To face it was madness. But Kaelen's voice was fire. If the gods fear it, then I will slay it. And when I do, the sea will be mine. Not all followed. That winter, a faction of his fleet turned against him, led by Rold the Red, a jarl who had once bent knee to Kaelen but now called him cursed. Rold accused him of blasphemy, of leading men into doom for his own glory. The fleet split, 30 ships against 20. The betrayal cut Kaelen deeper than any blade. Men he had bled with now raised steel against him. The sea boiled with battle, longships ramming and splintering, the water turning red with blood. Kaelen fought like a man possessed, his axe biting through shield and skull, his roar carrying over the storm. At last, he stood upon Rold's deck, the jarl kneeling before him. "You will damn us all," Rold spat, blood streaming from his mouth. Kaelen's voice was low, trembling with fury and grief. Better to be damned as a god than forgotten as a man. And with that, he struck the head from Rold's shoulders. The battle was won, but the cost was ruinous. Hundreds lay dead. Half the fleet burned. The sea rocked with the corpses of those who had once sworn loyalty to Kaelen. That night, Kaelen stood alone on the shattered deck, staring into the black horizon. The weight of his choices crushed him. He had dreamed of godhood, but the price was already tearing everything he loved to pieces. Still, he did not waver. He looked up at the stars, at the endless night above the endless sea, and whispered, "If the gods themselves stand in my way, then I will break them too." And so Kaelen set his course not for gold, not for plunder, but for the deepest waters, where the serpent of the deep waited in silence. The fleet sailed into waters no Viking had charted, where the waves grew colder and the sky darker with every passing day. The stars themselves seemed unfamiliar, constellations twisted and strange. The men whispered that they had sailed beyond Midgard's edge, into a place where gods seldom walked and monsters ruled. Kaelen stood always at the prow, his cloak whipping in the wind, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had grown leaner, harder, his eyes hollowed by grief and fire. He spoke little, but when he did, his men listened as though his words were carved in stone. One night, when the moon hid and the sea was black as ink, the waters stirred. At first it was a ripple, then a swell, then a roar that shook the ships. Men clutched their shields, peering into the darkness. Then they saw it. A body as vast as the horizon itself, coils rising from the deep, scales glistening like wet stone. The serpent of the deep. Its eyes were green fire, vast and merciless. When it opened its jaws, the sea rushed in as though the creature swallowed the ocean itself. Men screamed. Ships scattered. The beast struck with the force of a thunderclap, shattering a longship in a single lash of its tail. Bodies fell into the black water, vanishing without a sound. Kaelen roared above the din, his axe raised high. "With me? This is the trial of gods." He leapt from ship to ship, driving his men to stand against the impossible. Arrows and spears rained upon the serpent, bouncing from its scales like sparks from stone. Kaelen himself hurled a spear etched with runes, a gift from a dying skald he had saved years before. The weapon buried itself in the serpent's eye, and the beast bellowed in rage, the sound shaking the marrow of every man alive. The sea became chaos. Waves rose like mountains, ships cracked like twigs. Still Kaelen fought, his voice raw with defiance. He clambered up the mast of his flagship, leapt into the serpent's coils, and drove his axe again and again into its flesh. Blood black as pitch sprayed across the deck, sizzling where it touched wood. The serpent writhed, smashing ships in its thrashing, sending Kaelen hurtling into the waves. For a heartbeat, he sank. The sea closed around him, cold and endless, dragging him into silence. He felt himself slipping, surrendering to the deep. And then he saw her, Ran, goddess of the drowned, drifting through the water like a shadow of beauty and terror. Her net glimmered, heavy with souls of his men, their eyes wide with fear, their mouths screaming silently. She smiled at him. "You fight well, Kaelen Havblod," she whispered, though her voice filled his skull like thunder. "But every drop of blood you spill, every man who drowns for your dream, is mine. Do you not see? You are feeding me. You will never be king of the sea. You are its servant, and mine most of all." Kaelen thrashed against her net, against her presence. His lungs burned, his heart thundered. "No," he roared, though no sound left his mouth. "I will not serve. Not you, not Aegir, not Odin himself. The sea is mine." Rand's smile faded. Her eyes glowed with cold fury. She released him, and he shot upward through the water, bursting into the storm above. The serpent's head loomed over him, jaws wide enough to swallow a ship whole. Kaelen screamed and hurled his axe with every shred of his strength. The blade sank into the serpent's throat. The creature convulsed, its roar shaking the very sea, and then it fell, crashing into the waves with a force that shattered the night. Silence followed. The ocean stilled. The serpent's body sank into the depths, leaving only foam and ruin. Kaelen dragged himself onto the wreckage of his flagship, coughing blood, his limbs trembling. Around him, only 7 ships remained of 50. The sea was littered with corpses and shattered wood. The men stared at him in awe and horror. They had seen him slay the impossible, but they had also seen what it cost. Brothers, friends, fathers, all gone. Kaelen stood, his face pale, his body broken, but his voice steady. "You saw? You all saw. The gods sent their beast, and I struck it down. The sea will not be ruled by Aegir or Ran. It will be ruled by me, Kaelen Havblod, king of the sea." The men roared in answer, but their voices were heavy with grief. They had followed him into hell itself, and most had not returned. That night, Kaelen stood alone on the deck, staring at the horizon. He had slain the serpent. He had defied the gods. Yet Rand's words echoed in his skull. Every life lost, every soul drowned. Were they not proof that he was her servant still? The weight of it crushed him. For the first time, he wept, not for himself, but for the men who had believed in him, and who now drifted forever in Rand's net. But even as the tears fell, the sea whispered to him. It called his name, soft and inexorable. Kaelen clenched his fists and swore through clenched teeth. "If I must drown the world itself to break her hold, then so be it. I will be god of the sea, and no one, not Ran, not Aegir, not Odin, will stand in my way." The path was set, but the cost had only begun. The years that followed the slaying of the serpent were marked by both triumph and sorrow. Word of Kaelen Havblod spread across coasts and kingdoms. Skalds sang of the man who had stood against a beast of the deep and lived. Kings whispered his name with dread. Where once his fleet had been scattered and broken, new warriors came in droves, eager to follow the man who defied gods. Soon, Kaelen commanded 100 ships, their sails black as ravens, their prows carved with snarling beasts. But power came with hunger, and hunger came with cost. Kaelen did not raid as others did. He did not strike for silver or thralls. He struck for the sea itself. He seized harbors and river mouths, strangling kingdoms by water until they bent to his will. He demanded tribute not of land or livestock, but of ships. Each year his fleet grew. Each year his name darkened the horizon. Yet no matter how vast his power, he was never satisfied. At night, he walked the decks alone, hearing whispers in the waves. Sometimes they were the voices of the men he had lost, crying out from Rand's net. Sometimes it was his father or Varric calling him home. But most often, it was Ran herself, laughing softly, reminding him, "Every soul you feed the sea is mine." One winter, when the fleet returned heavy with conquest, Kaelen came ashore to a small village he had once raided. There, among the ashes of rebuilt homes, he found a woman with hair the color of midnight and eyes like storm clouds. Her name was Ellen. She did not fear him. When others bowed or spat at his name, she only looked at him with calm defiance. Kaelen, who had faced gods and monsters without trembling, felt undone by her gaze. Against all reason, he returned to her again and again. In time, she came to his hall upon the sea, and for a fleeting season, Kaelen knew peace. She bore him a son, Arvid, strong and fearless, and Kaelen dared to think that perhaps he could be both king and father, both god and man. But peace is not the gift of the sea. The gods had not forgotten Kaelen's defiance. One spring, as the fleet sailed to claim new waters, Thor himself descended from the storm. His hammer struck the waves, and 3 ships were crushed in a single blow. Lightning split the sea as Kaelen's men screamed. The god's voice was thunder. "Mortal fool, you trespass on the dominion of gods. The deep does not belong to you. It belongs to us. Kneel, or be broken." Kaelen stood on the prow, his axe raised high, his cloak snapping in the storm. "I knelt once as a boy. Never again. If you fear me, then strike me down. If you cannot, then you will know I am no mortal." Thor roared with laughter and rage. Their battle was chaos itself. Lightning against steel, storm against will. Kaelen's axe, though forged by mortal hands, sang with power not its own, as though the sea itself had poured into its blade. Blow for blow, he withstood the thunder god until at last Thor struck him with a hammer blow that shattered bone and sent him crashing into the sea. The fleet believed him lost. Men wept, some cursed the gods, others fled. But after 3 days, when the storm cleared, Kaelen returned. His body was broken, his face scarred, his hair white as frost, though he was still young. He bore in his hand the shattered haft of his axe, and in his eyes burned something unearthly. He said little of what had passed beneath the waves. Some whispered that Ran had claimed him at last, only to cast him back as her champion. Others said Aegir himself had bowed to Kaelen's defiance. Whatever the truth, he returned changed. His men knelt not to a jarl, not to a king, but to something they no longer dared call mortal. But power cursed him. When he returned to Ellen, she looked at him with sorrow. "You are no longer mine," she said softly. "You belong to the sea, and the sea is cruel." Kaelen tried to deny it, but he saw the truth in her eyes. He had become something other than man, something that drew storms in his wake. When their son Arvid reached his 12th winter, a storm struck their home. The sea rose without warning, waves swallowing the village. Kaelen fought the waters, screaming at Ran to spare them. But when the tide withdrew, Ellen's body was gone, and Arvid's small form lay broken in his arms. The Sea King howled. The sound carried for miles, a cry of rage and grief that shook even his fiercest warriors. He buried Arvid with his own hands, carving runes into the boy's stone with fingers torn and bleeding. To Ellen, lost to the waves, he offered his own blood upon the shore. That night, Kaelen stood at the edge of the sea, his cloak whipping in the wind. "You have taken everything," he whispered, "but I will not break. If you are goddess of the drowned, then drown me 1,000 times. I will rise 1,000 more. You cannot claim me. I will claim you." The waves surged, and for a moment, Kaelen thought he saw her standing there, Ran, her hair writhing, her smile cruel. "We will see, Sea King. We will see." Then she was gone, and only the tide remained. From that day, Kaelen waged not just war against men, but against gods. He struck at temples, burned shrines, defied omens. He demanded oaths from priests and kings alike, declaring himself not merely a jarl or even a king, but the sea god of the north. Some called him mad, others called him divine. His men followed, though each campaign left the sea red with blood and the fleet smaller than before. And Kaelen knew, though he would never say it aloud, every victory, every death, every soul taken by the waves fed her still. Rant's laughter haunted his dreams. Kaelen Havblod did not mourn as other men did. When grief took him, it was not with silence and stillness, but with fury. He turned loss into war, pain into power. Where once he had raided coasts for gold and ships, now he sailed for blood. Each harbor that had ever offered sacrifice to Aesir or Vanir, he burned to ash. Each temple that had raised a song to gods that had taken his wife and son, he cast into ruin. The Skalds no longer called him Jarl. They named him Havit's Conch, the Sea King. Others called him worse, Gudsbane, the Godslayer, or Blotbritaran, the breaker of sacrifice. But none dared defy him on the water. His fleet carved through waves like wolves through snow, sails black as night, oars dripping red. Yet the greater his power, the smaller his fleet became. Not because men deserted him. No, they clung to his legend with fanatical zeal, but because the gods themselves struck at him. Storms rose from clear skies. Leviathans stirred in the deeps, drawn to his defiance. In one battle, A wave higher than mountains struck the fleet, drowning 20 ships in an instant. Only Kaelen's flagship. I have slain your children. I have defied your gods. I will carve my name upon the sea itself. Face me, beast, and know Kaelen Havblod. Sea king, sea god, have its conch. The serpent struck, and the battle began. The sea boiled as Jörmungandr rose, its coils spanning horizons, its scales gleaming like iron mountains. Storm clouds gathered, blotting out sun and moon. The very air reeked of salt and venom. Kaelen's warriors, those few still living, clutched their shields with shaking hands. Some fell to their knees, praying to gods they had long forsaken. Others wept openly, knowing their end had come. But Kaelen did not falter. He stood upon the prow of his ship, white-haired, scarred, his body marked with runes that burned faintly like embers. His axe glowed with stormlight, cracked but unbroken, the last remnant of his battle with Thor. He stared up into the serpent's colossal eyes, and in their mirrored depths he saw the reflection of his own fury. "You guard the seas as if they were yours," Kaelen shouted into the wind. "But they are not. They belong to no god, no beast, no fate. They belong to me." The serpent's hiss was like the tearing of mountains. Venom dripped from its fangs, sizzling as it struck the water. Then it lunged. Kaelen leapt to meet it. The world became chaos. Fangs against axe, storm against storm, venom against blood. Each strike of the serpent's body shattered ships like driftwood. Men screamed as waves taller than towers swallowed them whole. Lightning split the sky, revealing in its flash Kaelen clinging to the serpent's back, his axe sinking deep into scale. He carved his way upward, blood and venom spraying, the roar of the beast shaking the heavens. Every step cost him. Fangs slashed his flesh, coils crushed his bones, salt filled his lungs. Yet still he climbed, screaming defiance, until at last he stood upon the serpent's skull, staring into its burning eye. "This ends now," Kaelen howled, and drove his axe down with all the strength left in him. The blade split the eye, sank into the brain. Jörmungandr shrieked, thrashing in death, throes so violent that the ocean itself rose and broke. The sky split. Mountains crumbled. It was as though Ragnarok itself had come. And Kaelen was hurled into the sea. The waters closed around him, black and endless. His axe drifted from his hand. His body, shattered and torn, sank lower and lower. He saw faces in the dark, his father, Varric, Ellen, little Arvid, reaching for him. He wanted to go to them. He wanted to rest. But the sea did not let him. A voice echoed in the depths, cold and cruel and eternal. "Ran, you have given me everything, Kaelen Havblod. Thousands of souls, a serpent's death, even your own blood. You thought to claim the sea, but it is I who claims you." Kaelen's eyes burned as he glared into the darkness. His voice was ragged but unyielding. "No, I am not yours. I am not theirs. I am mine. I am the sea." And then, impossibly, the abyss itself bent. The waters swirled around him, rushing into his lungs, into his veins, into his bones. His body glowed with stormlight, his runes burning brighter than ever before. His broken flesh knit together, not as man, but as something else, something vast, something endless. When Kaelen rose again, it was not as Jarl, nor king, nor godslayer. He rose as the sea itself. His eyes glowed like lightning in the storm. His voice roared like thunder on the waves. His axe reformed in his hand, forged of salt and storm and blood. Above, the last of his men, clinging to broken timbers, looked upon him with terror and awe. "Have its good," they whispered. "The sea god." Kaelen did not answer. He strode across the waters as though they were stone, raising his axe. Behind him, the corpse of Jörmungandr sank into the abyss, its blood turning the sea black. Ahead, the horizon stretched infinite, storms bowing before him. But though he had won, though he had ascended, Kaelen knew the truth. He had lost everything that made him man. Ellen was gone. Arvid was gone. His father, his brother, his men, gone. To become eternal, he had surrendered all that was mortal. On the wind, he thought he heard laughter. Ran, still mocking. Or perhaps the gods themselves, seeing how fate had twisted even the strongest man into their game. Kaelen did not care. He turned his gaze to the endless horizon and spoke, his voice echoing across sky and sea. "Let the gods laugh. Let fate weave and break. I am Kaelen Havblod. I am the storm. I am the tide. I am the sea. And with that, the Sea King vanished into legend.